Okay, so today we are going to go through the lecture again that I did on Tuesday and that I forgot to have the microphone on for. So hopefully this time it'll go just as well. It'll also go a little bit faster. The advantage of recording this at home and not in front of a live studio audience is that I can type as fast as I want. And if you need me to slow down, you can just stop the video and rewind. So I think you'll be pleased at how compact this material can actually be. So what we're going to do today is we want to work from two basic areas of concern that are stopping us right now from being able to build complete websites in Hapi.js. The first of those concerns is that we have a number of materials that we want to be able to publish publicly, right? So we might say that first of all, we want to be able to publish public resources. And so this is things like CSS, images, JavaScript, all that good stuff. We want to be able to publish that. And we don't necessarily want to have to set up routes for it, because setting up routes for each individual file that we would need to serve, or for each folder, that would really be a pain in the neck. So our goal is that we need to find a better way to handle public resources. And these are public static resources, so they're things that are not templated. We don't need to template CSS. We certainly don't want to template images or JavaScript. Those things are usually not templatable in any way. So really all we need to do is just pick those up off the hard drive and serve them up, and that should be pretty easy. The second thing we want to be able to do is we want to be able to share template layouts, partials, and sections. We've written our code. Whenever you, that's been the only page that we have been able to serve, right? We can serve an entire view out, and that's the template that goes out to the world. But what ends up happening, what ends up happening is that we have to rewrite everything on that page for every single view. Which is not terribly like WordPress, for example. We would have get header and get footer so that we could actually load the top and the bottom of the page, including all script includes, footer, copyright information, possibly sidebars, right? We will share those between pages. Otherwise, we're having to produce it or to copy and paste it, and you guys know how I feel about copy and paste. We don't want to do it. So we want to use some tools that Hapi will make available to us, so that we can actually share those portions of templates with each other. We're going to dig a little bit more into exactly how the handlebars templating system works while we're at it. So this should be good all around. So let's just getting our server running. This should be fairly familiar to you if you've seen it. We've done it for a couple. I've got a folder here. I'm calling it site. Inside of this, I have index.js, and I have a templates folder that I'm keeping index.html. The command shell for that folder, I'm going to install my two modules that I need. So off the bat, I know that I need Hapi and I need handlebars. And I can install them both in a single command. I don't necessarily need to run them separately. I can just say install Hapi handlebars. If I have a package.json, I should add -- save so that those will also be saved to my repo. I don't have to check in the files. Anyone who downloads this can instantly install all the packages that are required. I don't have a package.json because this is just a demonstration, so I'm just going to install them. Probably should have done this ahead of time because the video stream a little bit, as these should be terrible. Hopefully it should go fairly well. So it's going to sit for a little while, spins through. Great. That didn't take very long at all. So we now have both of those packages are installed here, and that means that I can actually start writing my server. So as any time that we're working on a Hapi server, we are going to create We're going to require it off the hard drive. And we're going to create our server using the server constructor function that's attached to that module. Server needs to be told where it's going to actually start up and connect to, which ports it's going to use. So that goes through server.connection. And we need to actually start it. So we need to tell it to open itself up and start listening for connections. Cool. Now, the next thing that we need to do two more things before our server is useful. The first thing is we want to set up our view configuration. And so we've been doing that with the views function, but all it does is set up configuration. And in our case, we have some simple options that we're going to pass in. First of all, we need to tell it where our templates are located for all of our different views when we call reply.view. So we're going to say that the path for these is inside of templates. You can put the / or you can leave it off. Later on, that may be important, but for right now, it's not a big deal. And we need to tell it about any of the template engines that we are going to use for this particular. We are going to be using the handlebars template engine. So origins is an object for HTML files require handlebars. And so the value of the HTML property is actually just the handlebars module. We're just loading it in and saying, here you go. We don't need to refer to it anywhere else. So this is a nice, clean way of getting it done. The last thing we need to do is we need to register a route, because our server is not any good on Hapi.js if it doesn't have a route on which it's going to listen and to which it can match requests. So we're just going to say server.route. The method for this route is, as always, a get. The path is the root path of the server. And the handler is a function that's called when a request comes in. And it gets past the request and the reply. And in this case, we are just going to reply with the view of index. We can specify index.html if we want, or we can just say index because we only have HTML files, and it'll figure it out. The other thing we need to do is actually index.html, so I'm going to go through and do that now. We're just going to type up a real quick HTML document. Give it a head with a title. Give it a meta car set, because otherwise Firefox gets snippy with me. And then in the body, we'll just write some real simple text. Cool. Now that we've got all that set up, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go back to my command line. I'm going to start my server by running node index. That starts up. We don't have any errors. And then Firefox, I say, let's load localhost 8000. There we go. There's my page. So far, so good. Now, once I've got that up and running, we actually want to start, like ideally, we would want to load style sheets onto this page, right? But we don't necessarily want to embed them. If you have to put the style into every single page, then what that does is that creates, it bloats your pages. It means that you have to write those directly into the templates, right? Obviously, what we really want to do is write with a rel of style sheet and an href to where we want it to go. I'm going to type an href here, and it'll become clear in a minute why I'm doing it this way. We're going to say that this is assets style.css. I'm going to kick my server over. When I reload the page, nothing happens. And if we look in the network panel for this particular page, you're going to see that style.css here, whoa, thanks Firefox, right, it's loading with a 404. It's not actually able to load style.css. Well, I mean, that makes sense. We haven't created .css. We also don't have any routes for style.css. So that's kind of awkward. And one thing that we could do, for example, once we created the file, we could say server.route method get path is assets file, and the handler would be a function, pressed reply. And then in here we could, and write out all the code for this, but we could load the file and then pass it But this would require us to kind of do a lot of housekeeping, right? We need to be able to load those files. We need to be able to do so in a cross-platform. To create an additional route. What happens if that route is multiple directories deep? What if those files are not strings? So we can't load them directly as a string in a different way. There's just kind of a lot to manage. Certain headers that files expect to have set when we load them onto a page, and we don't really. So an easier way to do this, instead of declaring a route and hand coding it ourselves, in our site, we're going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this folder public. And public is equal to assets, but they play different roles. And the reasons that they have different names is because in our repo, we think of these as being the public assets. And so from a source perspective, they are different from the other assets, right? Like when you contact this server, you cannot get access to my index.js file. That file sets up routes, and it may return items from the templates, but you also can't go to my site and say /templates/index to get access to this template directory. They're all hidden away. But in a public folder, these assets are going to be all made available. On the front end, remember that we want to describe our URLs in a helpful, RESTful way. And that means that we want them to not from the point of view of a developer, but from the point of view of somebody who's talking to this site or trying to use it. So we're going to expose it as assets, and that's why these names aren't going to match. But we'll talk more about that in a second. Inside this folder, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to save it as style.c. And then inside here, I'll just write some very obvious styles to make it clear that this is working. So I'll say that body tag, the color of this should be my favorite color of purple. And then instead of creating a route directly for these, create what's called a static resource route. And it's something where it's able to serve the entire directory, just kind of like aliasing together. And Hapi will take care of actually loading those files, making sure that they get the right headers, sending them down to the client. And it looks a little like this, most of which is going to look. We still use server.route to register it. We still say that the method is a get. And we still have to declare a path, although our path is a little bit different. We're going to say that this is assets and then a param with a star after it. What that star means is that we many directories deep, and basically everything after assets / is going to all be that parameter. Doesn't matter how many subfolders you put into a, we would say that we might make a route that's like this, right? We might say details. And so then this part is the parameter, but details is something that has to be actually in the URL. That's not so here. Instead, we're basically saying this param should eat everything after asset. And for our handler, we're going to use a configuration object instead of a function. This configuration object has a directory, a path of public. Cool. Let's give that a shot. So if this works, we're going to load this, and that means that all of the text in the body of the page should become purple because our assets / style.css public style.css, right? Straightforward relationship, nothing terribly complicated. And then when we visit this page, ta-da! Now a lovely Prince-inspired shade of purple. And if we want to, we can change that. I don't actually know if it'll do a live reload. Oh, good, it does. So clearly we are editing the CSS file. It is being served. It's being served from not public, but from assets style CSS. But that's fine. We just make them look different because they play a different conceptual role on either side. If you want, you could make them both public. That's also fine. But it feels a little bit weird because now you're saying that public, but clearly the rest of the site is also public. It's just not structured on the back end publicly. So to me, having a public folder that is actually shown to you in the URL is strange. It makes me wonder if you have a private folder, and so I like assets as a place where I can store CSS, I can store images, all that stuff. It can just hang out there, and it'll all be taken care of. I don't need to write a handler function. Instead, this configuration object tells Hapi what I want, and it takes care of it for me. So that's good to know. So this is the first part of our project today, is we're setting up this resource folder. And like I said, it can contain anything. So if we were to go to, say, place, and we were to download a kitten, and let's look at this particularly here. I'm going to save that into my public folder as kitten.jpg. And then in my template, I'm going to add that to the body. Still has to go in assets, but I can say assets kitten.jpg. Save it. Restart my server because templates are cached right now. And now, there we go, looking fancy. Cool. And I can even move it deeper, right? So I might want to structure my files in such a way that images where the kitten is, and I might have a folder for CSS where I keep my style. And as long as I update those paths here, because of the star in my route, it doesn't matter how many folder levels deep it is, and Hapi will still find it. So after the server is restarted, this will still work, even though when we view the source, they're coming from subdirectories. That all works out. You can structure your assets any way that you want them to be inside of your folder. A lot of projects use public. It is up to you that you want your stuff to be structured. So let's create a second page. So we've got this here. And let's assume that we are making a portfolio site for me. So I might say that this is my site. And then I might have some navigation. And inside of that nav, I might have some links. So I might have, this takes you to the home page, which is the current page that we're on. We might have another that is classes for all of the classes that I teach. I'm going to make a quick change. You may remember from the views I'm hashed false, because as long as we're only playing around in the templates, that way I won't have to restart the server quite so often. That's a really useful thing to have. So now I want to make a page at home, but I need to make my classes. So let's create a second view. Each page that is a different kind of data, a different kind of presentation, needs to have its own view. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to save a new classes.html. Paste this in. And here are the classes that I teach. So let's give it a little classes I teach. And inside of this UL, we'll put Web 150. ITC 298, and MIC 102G. Cool. Now we need to register a route for this, so we're just going to do that again as well. So this was the route for the home page. For a second page, we need to register a second route. We can just say that the method is get. The path is /classes. And the path, remember, is what the visitor types. It's not the path to the template. It's the path that someone sees in their browser after the domain name when they visit your server. So the path is important to think of it. It's basically external. It's not internal. And then finally, we have our handler, function, request. We're going to reply with a different view, with the classes view. Cool. So my server is restarted to register that new route. Here's my page. Click on classes, that takes me to my other page. Click on home, it takes me back. Clearly, we're going to change some of these styles because they're kind of hideous. So we'll say the font family is sans serif. And within the nav, links should be text decoration. Then border bottom 1px dotted black. Give this a... Oh, I'm saving the wrong file here. Hang on. Those files. So not that style.css, the one that is in here. Should have thought of that. There we go. And we'll give them a color of black. Cool. All right. We'll also give my nav a little bit of padding. I don't know why I'm wasting time on this, but it's just so. Here we go. So this is a perfectly useful portfolio site now. And I could, if I wanted to, I could build the pages. But what this is basically making me do is it's making me build all of my HTML the same way that I did it before I learned languages let me solve the repetition problem, right? So if this were WordPress or even just a PHP site where we could include files, we would be breaking this part and this part up because the different on either of these pages is the content section, right? So this section here, which is content, is important, but everything after that the same in both of these pages. So there's not really any good reason for me to have to copy and paste it between either of these two things. We don't actually want to do that. It gives us a tool where using handlebars, we can declare what's called a layout. And that's a little bit different from a visual layout. And layout is a file that basically serves as a wrapper for our content. And then inside of our templates, we don't have to put all of the stuff that's in the wrapper. And that means that the only different view to the next are the things that actually change, whereas your top, your bottom, your navigation, your sidebars are probably the same on all of your pages. So let's set this up. We are going to create a new directory. We're not going to keep this in with our templates. We're going to put it in a separate place. So we're going to make a folder called layouts, even though we only might have more. And inside here, we will create a new file that we're going to save as layouts, and we're going to call it default.html. So default.html is going to include everything that was above my content, that right out. Everything that was below my content, cut that right out. And then where my content page, I write this tag. So it's content surrounded by 3 mustaches. And we'll talk about why it's 3 mustaches later. In here, meanwhile, I can get rid of that. And on my classes.html, I can actually just delete it all. So all of that stuff just lives there. Instead, those views will be in content tag goes. Now we do need to be happy about the fact that layouts exist. So we need to do a little bit extra configuration server.views. Tell it that our layout path is layouts. And we're going to tell it that the default layout that we're using is default.html. If we had other layouts, we could change the layout when we call reply.view. But that's kind of an advanced topic for right now. For the most part, we're only ever going to use the one. Most sites only ever have the one layout. So now that I've got that, I can restart my server. And now, when I look, it's going to run the view, but then it's going to inject that into my layout right here where the tag is. So, getting different. But what it does mean is that if I decide to add a link, for example, be able to mail me, I might add a link to my school address. That's a horrible link. I might save that. And now, any of these pages, that change can be made on both got the email link. Anything that I decide to put into this layout will be shared between them because it's a wrapper around where the content goes. There we go. So now I've got my portfolio page. I had to set up this default, and then I had to tell Hapi what folder it was in and what the name of it was. And as long as I do that, this is the equivalent in WordPress of your header.php and your footer.php. There's not really a very good reason to have both of those in separate files. As far as it really easy to forget, particularly when you start to notice, well, how many divs did I open? You have to make sure to close exactly that many in the footer.php. I say just dispense with all that nonsense and instead keep one file the way that Hapi does that you load and just tell it where the content goes. The reason that this is 3 mustache tags is because it's injecting HTML. And we talked a little bit about how, by default, mustache turns HTML into text, meaning that somebody can't type a B tag and turn all of your site bold when it gets passed through the template. Instead, it'll come out with angle brackets B, close angle brackets, and it'll actually show up as text on the page and be exposed as, well, I can show you actually. So if I convert this into a regular tag, you'll see, right, it's my HTML. I want our HTML to actually end up on the page when we know that it's our view. We know that our views contain HTML, and we know that they're safe because we made sure that they only contain things that are escaped. They themselves do not have any security holes, so it's okay to pass their HTML through. And that means that we can actually get access to the stuff that's inside of them. Cool. So it becomes a lot easier to actually use, to create small views and to share. However, is still actually a template, which is that I can still use normal template tags inside here. So I'm going to create a title for each of these pages so that they can have different titles. And I'm going to let each page say what its title is, followed by my name, because this is my portfolio. And in my server route, I can just call a var. Just render this view. There's nothing to customize about it. But if I want to customize these mustache tags with actual information from my application, I can do that by passing in an object. And inside this object, any key tag gets replaced. So in this case, I'm going to replace the title tag, meaning this right here, with this. And it knows that it's the title tag because it's a property of the argument that I pass into the view. Same for classes, right? Its title is classes. So there we go. Now I changed a JavaScript file and not a template, so I do still have to restart the server. But now when I do it, you'll see that up here the title is classes. The title here is home. They're still sharing the same layout. And technically, we can still use that also elsewhere in the page. So I could still say h2 title, and that would also get the same value substituted in. I don't really want to do that. It's hideous. It proves my point. Cool. So layouts are, between layouts and the ability to serve static resources from our server, this gives you the ability to do most of what you would do with WordPress, to be honest with you. You can define different templates. Those templates should be on a per type basis. So for example, in WordPress, you would not, I hope, create a fresh template for every single page on the site with the content typed into the template list. In WordPress, you create a post.php, and then you put your content in as data, and when that template is loaded, WordPress actually inserts the data into the template so that you have your content on page. We do the same thing with Hapi, right? So each of our views is a different kind of data. It is not itself, or it should not be a template that we try to use for everything, or one template per page. Because if we had multiple pages that had the same structure and just different content, we should pass that data in to the view through its context object instead of trying to templates for each one. And that, again, is just in the name of reducing repetition, right? If I have classes that I teach, but I also have software that I've written, and they are structured in exactly the same way, it doesn't make any sense for me to maintain two templates. I should just have two list templates that I can feed different lists of things. So let's actually talk about that. In this case, I have 3 classes. But what if I want these classes to all have particular information and particular tag structures? So for example, each of these might be a link to a subpage. Classes Web 150. And you never know, like maybe I want all of them to end in the fact that they're all at Seattle Central. If I have to write this for each and every one of them, so now I have to create a link here. That's a href classes C298. I'm just duplicating effort. These are the same. The only things that change are here. Luckily, templates give us a way to work around that. So what we're going to do in addition to the title I'm going to pass to my classes, I'm also going to pass a classes property, which is it's an array containing objects. So these objects are the name of the class and the URL. So this should be it's going to be classes / Web 150, but the only part that changes is the Web 150 part. And we might go ahead and let's add an institution. This was taught at SCC. I'm also teaching this week at UW, so let's add that class. So that would be com 499b. Its URL is com 499. And its institution is the University of Washington. Cool. In this array in, now what I want to do is I'm going to loop through, and for each of these objects, I'm going to output this. But I'm not going to output it as an object. Instead, I'm going to take these individual properties and inject them into my template. Let's see how that works. So I'm going to clear this out. For the first one, we're going to use it as our example. And where the URL is, I'm just going to put a URL tag. Where the name of the class is, I'm just going to say name. Where the institution is, I'm going to write that. What I also need to do is I need to let to loop through that object, right? This would work for each individual one, but the array, otherwise it doesn't know which one we're working on. So we're going to tell it to, for each classes, to loop through. And the way we do that is with these section block tags. They start with a hash, So hash classes means for each thing in classes, output this HTML. Continue outputting all of the HTML is everything between hash classes and slash classes. So everything in here will be repeated. The other thing that's interesting about this is when I iterate through classes, URL, name, and institution will be local to each class as I work my way through the object. So the first time around, URL will be the URL, and ditto for the name for the institution. And then the next time that a process goes through and it uses the tags for that item. But I don't have to go through and manually insert each item. I can just say, okay, for each class, pull out its URL property, its institution property, and inject those onto the page. Let's see what that looks like. It's over. Classes. Here we go. So now this goes to classes-web150. This goes to classes-/com499. They have different labels. They have different places where they take place. And adding new classes can be as easy as just. More importantly, this data could be a module, so I could separate it out, or what's more likely is it would be pulled from either a structured data file, such as a spreadsheet, or from a database. So instead of actually writing this code in here, I could query a database, get those rows back, and then pass them to my template. And that's how we would fill those in. It's the same thing that WordPress is behind the scenes. We're just doing it a little bit more obviously, right? We don't have quite as much setup as WordPress gives you, where it goes and it posts object, all those different things. In this case, we have to fetch it ourselves. But the concept is the same. There's really no difference in whether this data comes from being hard-coded into our JavaScript or whether it comes from some sort of data storage. And what that data storage is doesn't particularly matter. It's always going to be an async process. Just to show you what that looks like, I'm going to take this array out, and I'm going to put it into a new file called classes.json. And in a JSON file, all the keys have to be quoted. So I'm just going to add quotes to these real quick. That's easy enough to do. And then in my index.js, I need to have a value here, but I need to read that off the hard drive. So I'm going to use the file system module, which we've used before, right? It comes built in to Node. If we say require fs, then that'll give us all the file system. So this is doing all the things like reading files, writing files, getting the contents of it. In this case, I'm going to read that file off the hard drive, classes.json. I need to tell it that this is a UTF-8 file. And then in my callback, I will get the data. And I'm going to move my reply into that function so that it can have access to the data, because unless it's in the callback, read file process will take some time, and I won't have the data to put here. JSON. Let's just do this. JSON.parse file contents, and I'll just pass that class list directly in. Right off the bat, this won't look any different. I'm still seeing these classes. But the nice thing about it is now that every time that a reply comes in, if I decide to add a new class, if I decide to say that I'm also going to teach ITC 298, its URL is classes/ITC 298 is SCC. I can save that. And now it'll be loaded, because when a new request comes in, it reads that JSON file off of the hard drive, passes it to this function, has the data, we parse that into our class list variable, pass it into the, it becomes very, very easy for us to load this from a file. But the same thing would be true. You can easily imagine this also being loading it from a database, right? So instead of doing this, I instead make a call to like SQLite, and I might say database.all select star from classes function here class list. Now I'm talking to a database. But the same process has occurred here, right? I've made an asynchronous callback to get the content. It doesn't matter if it comes from a file, whether it comes from a database. All that really matters is that it comes from somewhere, and then we pass that into our view. So this is going to be an incredibly useful skill for you guys. Absolutely something that we are going to practice in our lab and that you should practice on your own. You will see that we're starting to get a little bit of a nest going on here. And one of the reasons that I tend to move my handlers into their own modules is to kind of fight that pyramid. But other than that, this is actually reasonably well behaved. And part of this is actually coming from this object. So it's not a huge burden on us. In our template, we used these section blocks to say, yes, I want to repeat things. We can also use this to make stuff optional. So what if our site had an admin ability? So on some pages, we might be authorized to do things if we were logged in. And let's say that there was an admin bar that if I'm an admin, I want you to show this section here, which is a bold paragraph of text saying you are logged in. Now, in order to see that, I need to tell my template that I'm logged in. Here in my view, I might send is true for classes. I'll change in JavaScript, that has to change here. And then I'm logged in on that page because I passed in true. That's a truthy value. So when you use one of these sections, they don't only have to be for, they also serve as conditionals. You can actually think of them as how many times should I repeat this, with 1 being the default. So not an object or an array, it repeats it once. If you pass it a falsy value, such as null, false, it repeats it 0 times, meaning that it doesn't show it at all. So this is also a handy way to hide and show parts of the page, depending on whether or not we are enabling or disabling those. So on our classes page, admin is true. On our index page, handler is not set. And so that's why you'll see that when I go home, it no longer shows. We would normally build a real authorization system to set admin being true or false. But in this case, I'm not super worried about it. Let's talk about one more thing. So one of the other reasons that we use template, and highly recommend if you're interested in how these tags work, this is in the documentation, but the other thing that you should do is you should search for, or just go to mustache.github.io. So Handlebars is a library, and Mustache templates can be used in lots of languages. We use them in JavaScript, but it's also available for all of these languages here. And if you go to the manual page, don't ask why it's marked 5, it'll actually go through and it'll give you a synopsis of how these template works, and it'll take you through all of the different. So we've been using variables, which do a substitution. We've been using sections, which allow us to do true or reproduce things in lists. We can use non-false values. You can invert a section, meaning that it only shows up if the value is false, and it doesn't show up if it's true. But then the other thing that's super useful is what's called a partial. And a partial is a sub-template that we've loaded. So we've kind of got, in our default, we have an over template, a template that gets wrapped around our view. We can also create it's used inside of a page. Let's take a look at how that works. So I'm going to do this by creating a sidebar. So I'm going to save this. And inside of templates, I'm going to make a subfolder called partials. And in partials, I'm going to say that this is sidebar.html. It's a side tag. And it says, hello, I'm a sidebar. And our style will just and in our views, we need to tell Hapi partials are loaded from. They get loaded prior to any other templates being run, and they will actually be cached no matter what. It won't apply to them, which can make partials kind of frustrating, but in general, you want to develop with something, and then you'll only move it out once it's shared. So at that point, you can handle it being in a different place. We're going to say that the partials path is templates/partials because we put them in a subfolder. Take our folder over. Now we haven't used it yet, so far it's not here. And maybe on classes we don't have the sidebar, but on the index we do. So let's go ahead and before we put our picture of our kitten, let's include this partial by using the right arrow to kind of include. If you think about things saying points like put that thing here, and then we need to tell it the name. The name of this is sidebar. We don't need to say like partial/sidebar because we already told it the full directory path where our partials are loaded. Now we have our sidebar on a page. If we wanted to use a sidebar somewhere else, we could do that just by and then anything we typed in here, for example, of links elsewhere, to other useful sites. Right. Now those could be loaded on every single page. One thing that's important about partials, I think, is not only that they are useful here, but also that they can be combined with sections, so you can use them to repeat. So in our classes, we have this kind of structure. It might be possible that I would want to have class links somewhere else on my page. For example, what if my class links are actually a way that they do stuff based on JavaScript page? So all that's applied to them, right? They have a class of class link. They have a data attribute that's attached to them. Data course is the URL. I don't know what else they might have. They might have a target is new, right? We could do all kinds of stuff with these links. Doesn't really matter. The point being, if I want to use this particular kind of link somewhere else where it has all of this stuff included, plus the name, and I have to go through and actually copy and paste that somewhere unless I move it into a partial. So by creating a new partial file, courselink.html, I'm going to cut that out, and I'm going to move it into that file. Oops, sorry. Paste that in. There we go. And then inside of classes, I'm just going to say, hey, for each class, why don't you put a course link partial? So now that's included, and to give each of those courses additional class. So I might say that they are not only class links, but they are also pop-up links. And pop-up links in my style are italic. Right? Once I restart the server, those links are italic, and any place where I've used that partial becomes italic. So if there are other pages where I also link to classes and I want to have all of the styles and component stuff, that becomes a case where a partial is really useful. I'll show you an example before I sign off. I recently used partials in case you're interested. So I recently worked on a project at work that was for tracking all of their pictures, tests, loaded where they were, and we tagged those on the map so that, for example, here, you could see Evan's tweet here. You could also see it here. What I don't want to do in this case is I do not want to have to recode that just to put it in two places. It's the exact same tweet. It has a slight change in that I hide the follow button inside of the window, but other than that, this is all the same. And when I make changes to one, I actually want to make changes in both. Like if I change the way the dates are formatted, I don't, because then if I forget, I might end up in a situation where these dates are accurate, these dates are not. Side of my template for this, the Seattle Times repo for May Day Twitter. And this is a slightly different template principle. You'll see that I'm actually including that partial both. So this is the tweet partial is included both inside of my map for each marker. So I include tweet.html. This language, this particular templating language is EJS, and it doesn't use the same delimiters. But it's the same process, right? I'm including the tweet, I'm passing it the... Or in the stream, I do the exact same thing. And now I can output the same data or different data, because not all tweets are technically geotagged, so not all of them can be placed on the map. So this is a filtered list, but these can all be, they will all use the same layout as these, and if I decide, I don't have to worry about changing it in the other, because they will use the same HTML file, which you can see is fairly complex. I would not want to have to scroll through and hunt this down in two places in the page, pass in the data that I want it to handle. So being able to use partials for class, to be fair, is a little trivial. But being able to use it for sidebars and for more complex UI components, and the more of a complex application that you get, the more that this is necessary. So that when you're building like tables of emails or map markers or lists of particularly complicated data, being able to separate that out into a partial makes it easier to collaborate, makes it easier to reason about, and makes it easier for us to use that chunk in multiple parts of our application. It between different templates, and we can use it multiple times in the same template. So partials are very important. So real quick, what we've gone over today then. Most of this has actually been the same up here. Is first of all, we've added layouts, and layout the wrapper for our page with a content area, and it must be content by default. You can actually change this keyword, but there's no good reason to, so leave it as content. So triple mustache content then injects the view for our pages that we create, that we name here, but it still wraps it up in all of this HTML. Second thing we did is that we used this special direct to serve our public directory here as though it was the assets URL. And anything that we put in there is just served directly. That means that our CSS files and our images can all be served from public, and we don't have to worry about writing individual routes for them. So this, combined with the layout, gives us the ability to simpler sites, because we now actually have a place where assets are served, and we can reuse the frame of the page, the wrapper, everywhere else. And the last is using more advanced templating. So we use section to create repetition, or to create optional sections based on the value that we pass in as part of the view. So whatever goes into this object is used to fill in those section tags, and those section tags, or outside, we can use partials to then load and share other pieces of site layout across our entire. Between these four things, you should have a pretty solid grounding to build any site in Hapi that you would build in WordPress, or that you would build in plain HTML. We're going to concentrate for the rest of the quarter on how to build kind of more application-centric. We're not going to tend to build portfolio sites. You can, but we don't tend to build portfolio sites in Node. It's not bad at it, but it's not particularly good at it either. And really, its strengths lie elsewhere. But it's good to know that we can do this if we really want to. So hopefully I will see most of you for the lab. For not having recorded the audio the other night for the Hangout. But in the meanwhile, I hope I'll see you on Thursday. If you have any questions about this, please send me an email, and I will look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks for listening. Bye.